Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how to apply watercolor techniques to our Manga ink technique practice worksheet. So we've already inked our practice worksheet. We used various inking techniques that we learned and we applied them to create the elements of highlights and shadows. And so now we need to be thinking about color and what colors we may want to use for our hair. Our color scheme is complementary pairs. So let's say, for example, you want to use red for your hair, you'd have green for a background. If you use purple, you'd have yellow for a background, and orange, you'd have blue for a background. So complementary pairs are what we're working with. So for my hair, I want to use purple, and that would mean that when I work on my background, it will be yellow. So what I'm going to do is add lots of water to the tray of my watercolor palette and then just drop in a little bit of purple. So I want this to be really, really watery so that it's a low value. Then I want to load up my brush with direct paint so that it's high concentration of color, high value. And over the areas that I inked that I want to appear darker in value with that ink work, I'm going to add high concentration of color. And I'm going to follow the direction of the inking lines. So notice I use vertical hatch lines. I'm using a vertical brush line. And I'm carefully just moving that paint down and just really being careful with that brush, being deliberate, getting into those little nooks and crannies. And once my color starts to fade, I load it up again with the color from the palette. So I'll do that across the top and then I'll go back and do the tips. Just being very careful at this point because I do not want color to bleed into the face. So I'm not loading my brush up too much with color at this point so that it's not extra liquidy. And I am being very careful around those corners, making sure my brush is really small and angling it so that I can stay within the lines of those angles. So once I have that filled up, I may go over it one more time just to make sure that I've filled in all of the white spots. And then it's time to get into the watery part of my purple. So notice I dipped my brush into the pan where I dropped in a lot of water. I might even load up my brush with a little bit more water because in the highlight section of my hair, I want it to be a lighter value. So I'm dipping my brush in the water, adding even more water to that purple and getting it even more lighter value so that there's a high contrast between the shadows of my hair where I added those ink techniques and the highlights of my hair, which is where the paper is blank. So again, I'm just moving that color around, making sure that in the white section it is really liquefied, really low value, low concentration of color, moving that around carefully because again, I don't want that water to bleed into the angles close to the face because I don't want paint to bleed into the face. So once I'm done with that, I may just go over once more with my dark, go back over any areas that I missed at the top of my hair that are white paper showing, just really doing a spot check and going all the way around with that color. Once I'm done with my purple, I really don't want to use it again because I'm moving on to skin tone and I really don't want to have purple in my water mixing in with my skin tone. So make sure your face is all the way done before you move on to your skin color. So I have brown skin and I want to just do a brown, light brown kind of color for my face. So again, I have water in the lid of my palette and I just dropped in a drop of brown. I'm going to add even more water to dilute that brown even more, and I may even warm it up by adding just a little bit of yellow just so that it's a warmer shade of brown and not so cool. So you can play around with blending colors into your skin tone and test it on the paper. After I test it, then I can see what it looks like on the paper. And I feel like it could be a little bit more darker, so I may even add a little bit more. But I'm going to start from the bottom, so after I add a little bit more brown, I'm going to start from my neck. I'm going to start from my neck and work up because again, the top of my head where my hair meets my face is wet with purple, so I don't want those two colors to merge. So I'm going to work from the bottom up. And our neck usually is darker because it does have a shadow cast by our face and chin. And then I'm just slowly going to bring that color up. Careful not to get into my eyes at all. So I'm really going to be delicate with my brush around the eyes and make sure that I'm using really, really slow and deliberate movement just to move that color around, but just so that it doesn't bleed into the eyes. Now, just a note, this is not watercolor paper that we're practicing on. It's copy paper, which doesn't react and respond to watercolor like watercolor paper will. So you'll notice that right now there are some pools of color that are on the paper that you can blot up with a paper towel. Just have that handy if that happens in your practice, but just know that watercolor paper will respond differently, but it's always a good idea to have a paper towel to blot up that extra color. So you can see I'm now moving the darker color around more towards the bottom of the face where there would be naturally more shadow, and I'm just being very careful about how I'm swishing that paint around, keeping it away from the eyes, but then closing up on those details.